Well, good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, and my usual panelists for our post-mortem tonight. Malcolm MacDonald, formerly Newcastle United, number 9, Steve Hastie, and we've got Neil Mitchell, the Jordan Genders. Good evening, lads.
Evening,
Good evening, Steve.
Malcolm, where do we start? We had a chat this afternoon, and obviously you had a few technical difficulties. Didn't get a chance to get your prediction. My prediction this afternoon was Newcastle to lose 3-0. Gibbo's was to lose 3-1. I don't think we saw that coming tonight. There were 5-0 defeat.
No, but I certainly wouldn't have predicted a win for Newcastle. That's for sure. It was quite embarrassing tonight, wasn't it? Really embarrassing. That they just played backwards all the while. And if you have a look at some of the stats that were showing, Newcastle just weren't in it. And it makes me wonder, with the attitude and the way that they were set up. Did they come out of the dressing room just before kickoff with a white flag? That was the feeling I got, that they knew exactly what was going to happen and just didn't really seem to take part. It was quite embarrassing.
Yeah. Neil, when we were speaking off air just before we came on, I suggested to you that he might have picked the first 11 players off the bus.
Either that or you picked them out of a hat. I've never seen. We've had 5 players on that pitch today who've played fullback at some stage this season. And the last time I saw a team like that, Pardew picked it, and he had 4 left backs in it. There was just no rhyme, no reason to it. Kraft, the centre back, he's a right back. He's proved that he's not a wing back. He's proved he's not a centre back. He's a right back.
I'm not so sure he's proved himself as a right back even.
Well, for me at least, he's been better there in a 4-4-2 than he has in what we've seen him in other games. It just baffling. Bentleb played like a player who's been told you're not staying, because he really couldn't give a monkeys today. They say the opposite of love's hate. It's not, it's indifference. And I actually feel indifferent tonight. I really, really couldn't give a monkeys.
Yeah.
Tonight seemed to be about managing a defeat. And there's 2 ways you do that. You come out, like you said, Malcolm, with a white flag, or you go out and you have a damn good go. And yes, we've got injuries. Yes, we've got people who are tired. And could he not have just chucked some people into that team and said, do you know what? Just have a go. Just have a damn good go. And we didn't even look capable of that today. And that's poor. Really poor.
Yeah.
There's so many other things you could look at, but genuinely, he started. Everybody's saying it was 5 at the back, and then he pulled this stroke where it was actually 4-4-2 with Shelby playing pushed up, which makes us wonder: does he watch our podcasts after the game, perhaps? And it's like, what are you doing? Are you just picking it randomly? Do you have a big wheel with the positions on, and then when the position comes up, you pick a name out the hat? Because that's what that team looked like tonight.
But there was 2 up front. You could see that the middle 4 were put for the first few minutes. Were pushing up to those 2, keeping in contact, and yet the back 4 just kept dropping off, getting further and further away. And in the end, the midfield had to drop off, and that caused Shelby to drop off. Joe Linton was up there just on his own on the halfway line, and we were back to the game at St James Park.
Yeah, absolutely right.
It was Andy Carroll up front, but he was stood on the halfway line, totally on his own, no support whatsoever. And you think, oh, come on, get pushed up. And there was one instant in the first half where the back 4 was on the edge of the 6-yard box. Not one of the players was marking anybody, and the midfield 4 was just inside the box, and they were all marking.
Yeah.
And you think, well, that's crazy, because that's what the back 4 should be doing, marking on the edge of the penalty area, and the midfield could then push out. But it was utter disorganisation as far as I could see. Nobody really knew quite what they were doing or what they should do, and nobody was prepared to really have a go. You know, do you remember seeing the goalkeeper at all on the television screen? The Man City goalkeeper.
No. Other than when he had the ball at his feet.
Yeah. It must have been the easiest game that he's ever played in his life.
Like somebody said here, we were great for 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, until the back line dropped off.
Steve, give us your views on the game. I'm sure there are any more.
I just couldn't believe we played Shelby in such a forward position when you wanted to find the space, and he's the best passer of the ball that we've got. He played him as a false nine, which basically meant we had 2 false nines on the pitch, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Because the other one is just, well, he's a false nine to begin with, you know, in name as well as in number. I just couldn't fathom it. And at half time, you're expecting a change. And I put on Twitter that the best change would have been if they just all got on the coach and came home at half time, because then would have only had a 3-0 defeat, you know, would have coped with that, quite frankly. There was one point where they were making changes and we didn't, and we're still playing in the same manner, if not worse, in the second half. And he couldn't see it. He didn't want to do anything about it. And then the changes that he did make and the time that he made them were absolutely, you know, I just lost for words this afternoon watching that. Completely lost for words at times.
Right. Let me ask you guys. We know that the game started with Newcastle in a 4-4-2 formation. What do you think, beyond the 4-4-2 formation, was the instruction that the manager gave to the team and the players?
I don't think there was any. I honestly don't think there was any instruction, if I'm perfectly honest.
You couldn't see anything, could you?
No, nothing at all.
Couldn't see anything to say, yeah, that's how they've been organised.
We saw Southampton last week, Malcolm. Yeah, we saw Southampton last week, who put a performance in. Yes, it was a dogged performance. They got a goal. They held on. There was, you know, the City were very unlucky. They hit the bar, they hit the post. There was shots. The goalkeeper was making save after save. But at least they put an effort in. Tonight, there's not a single player put an effort in.
Why did Southampton succeed in the way that they did against Man City? Have you any idea?
Well, for a start, they had a plan. They had a plan. They had a plan to compete.
Right. The difference between Southampton and Newcastle is that the back four of Southampton pushed and pushed and pushed and kept forcing Manchester City as far away from their goal as possible. And the Man City players just didn't find the freedom, certainly nothing like the freedom that they had tonight.
And I think if anyone who's watched football this season will know, the Achilles heel for City is their defence. So if you want to get anything out of City, you attack them. You know, the defence is their Achilles heel. So you squeeze the space, you press. You don't give the midfielder time to dwell on the ball. You stop De Bruyne from dwelling on the ball, as he did constantly throughout the game. There was times when he was winning 3 and 4 tackles where we were just sort of bouncing off him because we weren't putting the proper tackling in. There was no movement in it. We had no shape, no cohesion, nothing. It was, and the manager obviously couldn't see that. And there was a bit where just before half time where they said that Steve Agnew's having a word. He's given some advice to Steve Bruce. Well, the advice must have been, do you want, you know, what do you want? Do you want tea or coffee at half time? Because there was nothing else that he could have been telling them, because if he had, he would have said it before kickoff.
Yeah, Ben Adams says, don't concede 10, Malcolm. That's what it felt like they were told.
Probably right. probably right.
Don't panic. Don't panic. They don't like it up. Captain Mandarin, I think that was the only bloody instructions I could see.
Toon fan suggests Bruce's instructions were just kick it, lads. We're getting a few suggestions in, as we often do. And there's an interesting question there, and this is one that I've often wondered, and it's come across a little bit this season. Do you think that Steve Bruce is in awe of some of these bigger managers, the likes of Klopp and Pep Guardiola? Lee Ryder put a tweet out tonight that that he was essentially talking to Pep for about 20 minutes on the sidelines, and Paul Oxley suggests exactly the same. Does Bruce come across as in awe of Pep's and Klopp's? That's the impression I get, hence why we need a new high-profile coach if the takeover goes through. Malcolm, do you get that impression? Is it something that's quite common that somebody could be in awe of somebody else who's a manager or head coach of another team?
Well, it's a really interesting one, is that, Steve? I've never really given it any thought. But now that you're mentioning it, I can see where the question's coming from. I really can. Yes, the Klopps and the Guardiolas of this world. Yeah, is he in awe, Steve Bruce? Because and it's almost as if that is the case, that he's passing it on to the players as well, and giving them an inferiority complex.
I think he gives them far too much respect, Steve. Far too much respect.
Yeah.
We used to have a manager who would remonstrate with anybody. We also had, if you go back, even John Carver. John Carver would argue with anybody, wouldn't he, when he was on the line? Pardew would argue with himself, because he loved himself, but he would argue with other managers. Bruce isn't that sort of bloke. At least he's not come over this season, and certainly not since the restart, as that sort of guy who can get you fired up, who can shout and scream, and who can motivate you from the line. He hasn't come over as that. In certainly since the restart. I think if anything, probably given too much respect to the opposition managers, certainly the Klopps of this world, and as we've seen twice now, Guardiola in the last 3 weeks.
Do you not think that you're playing Man City away from home? It's one of the most difficult fixtures you can have in Europe. Do you not think that he could have sent the side out in a really, truly aggressive nature?
Yes.
And see them digging into plenty of tackles, putting Manchester City players on their backsides. I didn't see any of that. I didn't see any of that until the last few minutes, and we saw that David Silva was upset about it. Was Newcastle's left back, who had a couple of digs. But it was all too little too late. Last few minutes of the game, for heaven's sake. From the first, nobody upset a Manchester City player and forced them to start looking over their shoulder.
But we're quite happy to take a kicking off them, as we always are, because, as you know, City, the masters of it, it goes round the team. If you lose the ball, then the first thing you do, if you can't win it back, is you stop them.
Foul.
You bring them down, you foul them, and then somebody else slots into that situation for the next 5 minutes and does exactly the same to keep you out of it. And that's the game plan that City have always had under Guardiola, and the masters at it. And we saw. Yes. Walker came on and he did it to Rose straight away. We saw Stones do it, pulling Richie back. In any other game, they're the sort of fouls where you see a yellow card. You would certainly see a yellow card for that if the crowd was in the ground.
Silva on share as well, mate. Look, today was a dead rubber. It means nothing to them. The title's gone. There's a good chance their European ban's going to be upheld. We're safe. We've got nothing to lose. Why did we play like a team that had something to lose? We should have gone out there like a team that had nothing to lose, because we had nothing to lose. We should have come out the traps like greyhounds. We should have got into them and just not been frightened to put a foot in. And we didn't even look like we had a plan. And that's the problem. You know, it was just so lackadaisical, so disjointed. Like Malcolm said quite rightly, after the first 10 minutes, the gaps between the back four and the midfield four and the front one with the one off, if you like, were just too far apart. We weren't able to do anything about it. And we just let them play around with the first two goals were just appalling. Social distance defending. Yeah, just play around us, mate, on you go. You know, just absolutely appalling. Almost carbon copies. We just let them do it.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if Phil Foden had finished better, we could have been 4 at half time.
Sure. One thing I noticed about Manchester City, particularly in the first half, that they love to sort of get a number of players into a small area, and they pass it and pass it and pass it and pass it. But usually, once they've lost the ball, that they tend to spread out. Man City didn't, and that small group of players just just went in a group around the ball, and they outnumbered Newcastle when Newcastle had the ball, and that I think is partly why the back four just dropped off so, because they seem to need space in which to play, and therefore dropping off is the obvious thing to do. You don't find space by closing everything down. And until Newcastle are prepared to play in small spaces, then they are going to get tanked by sides like Man City.
Yeah. I tell you what else City are good at. They spot a weakness and they exploit it. And they go at it and at it and at it time and time and time again. And they went down their left side continuously in the first half. They played the 1-2s on the edge of the box. They knew that they were going to be able to turn us. They knew they were going to be able to get behind us, and they knew that our two centre backs would be flat-footed. And you know that for me, that's the game management. That's the good coaching. That's what a manager does. He says to them, he identifies the weaknesses for them, and he tells them to go at it. And then the game was over after 10 minutes, because they've done that work. And after that, it's just a free-for-all for them, and they're allowed to then go out and they're allowed to show their talent and show their skill and show what they've got. And then Guardiola comes back in the second half, and it's back to square one again. But, even as though he even knew what we were going to be like the second half, because he knew that we were completely shot, and we had nothing.
Steve? Classic situation where we're looking to get nil.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of comments coming in from the supporters. Haven't got really much time to read them out because you guys have got a lot to say. I'm sure you've read a few of them on the screen. A lot of it's about the loan players, and that's very important. You would think the likes of Bentaleb and Rose in particular, Lazaro, they'd all be keen to put performances in, because we're coming towards the end of the season and they're playing for a new contract, potentially getting signed on, or they're putting themselves in the shop window for a bigger move. None of them covered themselves in glory tonight, and a lot of the reports and comments from the fans tonight are saying that they wouldn't play. One from Jason Carter. Yeah, should Danny Rose get another game this season? Lots of people very critical of him. Lots of people critical of Bentaleb. Malcolm, what's your opinion on the loan players? Are any of them worth taking a gamble on?
In the current situation, not really. No, I don't think so. Because if the takeover happens, got to look for a far better quality of players. Far better.
Yeah, Steve, what about you, mate? I mean, is there any of those players that you would keep? A lot of people seem to be in favour of Danny Rose prior to the game tonight because of the form that we've been in since Project Restart. But is there anybody who you would like to remain in the Black and White?
On those performances, no, Steve. On those performances, definitely not. I've always been a fan who said, with every club, is there somebody else better out there? And there's always somebody else better. And that's what good teams do. They identify better players and they make themselves for the next season a better team. And there's nothing in that squad that you would sit back and go, you know what? other than the players who weren't playing today in St. Maximum and maybe Zalmiron, that would give you any appetite for saying, you know, we've got the makings of a really, really decent squad for next season, because everybody else gets better. And as happened last season and the season before, we get worse. You know, everybody else steps up their game and we either stay static or we get worse and we get caught out. And under the new ownership, when they come in, let's hope that they have the same foresight as that and realise that, you know, there's got to be change. There's got to be change in that squad. And the change does come from the manager, by the way, because that's where you get your inspiration from. And that's where you get your tactical nous from. And maybe a different manager can get better out of those players, because even Bruce has managed to get something out of them on the odd occasion this season. But Rose, Lazaro, Bentaleb, you know, very, very disappointing that they couldn't roll their socks up today and see that they had a future or wanted to have a future at Newcastle United, because the performance showed that they probably don't. They certainly didn't deserve it.
Mo Salah's just scored for Liverpool, so they've gone 1-0 up against Brighton. Mitch, question for you there. Jeff Carter's asking, who do you think was responsible for the position of the back line tonight? Fernandez? We didn't have Lascelles in there and Lejeune, who were our natural leaders, in there. Who would you say was responsible?
It probably should have been, but it looked like it was Daffy Duck. You know, if there was a leader in the back, it should have been Fernandez. But what's he got to work with? He's got Danny Rose, who I'm sorry, he's not done enough for me. We've had 2 better left backs at the club this season, and neither of them are currently available for injury reasons. Kraft's not a centre back, simple as that. And then Yedlin's played very few games at right back, and I gather Bruce in training's been using him on the right wing. So that's great preparation for coming into a back four tonight, isn't it? And he really, there wasn't any organisation at the back. And then coming back to the loan players, we still obviously don't know what Lazaro is or isn't. Perhaps he's another octagon-shaped peg like Joe Linton is. I don't know. And Bentaleb today looked like a player who'd been told, no, you're not staying there. There was one point in the second half he got the ball and it turned out he was the most furthest forward player on the pitch. And he looked left, he looked right, he looked forward, he looked left, he looked right, and looked forward. Then turned around and played it back to Shelby and gave him a hospital ball. You know, that's appalling. That's really bad. But to me, changing demeanour from him today, I've quite liked his attitude for a lot of this. So far this season, when he's played, he's looked all right for me. But today he didn't. Today he looked like a player who's been told, your future's not here, son. Just play the season out. Now, whether that's a positive thing or not, who knows? Because maybe that's decisions coming from elsewhere. But that's maybe wishful thinking on my part. Either way, you know, today he was poor, very poor.
Malcolm, here's one to send the potential new owners into a cold sweat. I would suppose, realistically, how many players do we need to buy for next season if the takeover goes through? You know, we've survived, we've stayed up with games to play. We've got to the quarterfinal of the FA Cup. A lot of fans kidded by that. I've always said we're papering over the cracks. You know, from your perspective, how many players do you think Newcastle need to be looking at in the next transfer window?
I don't think it's how many players. I think it's what quality of players.
Yes.
That's the real key to it. And probably Newcastle need 4 high-quality players coming in. And they can then improve what is around them. And then in the next window, you get another couple in. The next window, another 2 or 3. And then all of a sudden, within 18 months or so, you've got a new team. It's a new side, but they all know each other. They understand what's going on, and they can go for it. And you move on a number of players trying to get some of the money back, but it's got to be a big investment for that, you know. And you're talking of 150 million maybe to get things kicked off. but buying 4 or 5 players.
Steve, what about you? What's your thoughts? 2-0 to Liverpool, by the way. Jordan Henderson scored now.
Yeah, I just heard that upstairs.
All right. I agree with Malcolm. I mean, you've got to have a plan, haven't you? You can't just go out and bring in 10 players, 11 players, and expect them to gel straight away. You've got to have a plan. And Malcolm says you bring in 4 quality there.
Sure.
And build up over a period of time, because that's what it is. There was an interesting question before that. Why is so many people in the press seem to have this thing about pushing Bruce for manager next season? The reason, if you ask me, is because they've got an agenda, because they're already writing the headlines for when he's not the manager next season, to be perfectly honest. I think that's what they're up to. I think they're trying to create some sort of a storm to be brewing. And that's their game plan, because that'll write the headlines. That'll be their headlines for the first few weeks. And that's the way of getting under the skin of fans again and causing a little bit of disruption at the football club when the new owners come in. And then the decision has to be made about Steve Bruce, and that gives them the opportunity to cast the shade, if you like, and get the doubters in, and divide the fans as well, because they've built this situation up about Bruce, and there are fans out there who think he should be given a chance. Probably not as many after today's performance, but that's my personal opinion. I think that's the game plan that some in the press are playing at the moment.
Yeah, Neil. Was that your thoughts as well?
There seems to be a lot of agenda about Newcastle United from all sorts of places at the moment. And in the press, most certainly. There are some people who are obviously close to Bruce, and they don't want to lose that relationship or the cushy whatever it is they've got with him at the moment. There's this constant wish to compare, and you can't, because you're comparing apples and pears, different seasons, different teams, different players. You've just got to look what's in front of you, and you've just got to look at that tonight. And you say to me, that's somebody who can take us on, and you want to trust them with millions of pounds to sign quality players.
Yes,
really? On the basis of that. Nah.
One of the problems, Mitch, is trying to get good players to come into your club.
Yes.
Most footballers will have watched that game tonight, and if a few days later a really top class player who's seen that game is offered the chance to join Newcastle United, what's his answer going to be?
It's going to be a very polite no, thank you.
Yeah.
Or at the very least 2 words.
Yeah, they'll be looking at it and saying, "Whoa, there's way too much to be done. You've not even got started." What that team that was out there today, it's a survival team, not a team that's started to be built for success.
It wasn't even that. That was a capitulation team. That was how can we manage to get beat by as little as possible, and that's awful.
Yes, and Carter makes a valid point. Let's not forget City spanked Arsenal 5-0, Liverpool 4-0, along with the other goal fest. I think it's the manner of the defeat tonight, not the result, which is worrying. So he is right. And it's the lack of effort from certain players. The flip-flops were on, whatever you want to say, whether the mentality wasn't right. And that comes down to the head coach, that they've got onto the pitch tonight with that mentality that try not to get beat by 10 lads. You know what I mean? It's something's not right with that kind of mentality, and Man City, you made the point right at the top of the program, Mitch, that Man City were in exactly the same boat. They've got no threat to their second place. They can't win the league, but they didn't go out with that attitude. They didn't go out with the same attitude as Newcastle, and they won 5-0.
Exactly. I'll be delighted if we'd lost 4-0 but had already won the league, mind.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, lots of comments coming in. Keyser Soze says 13 years of austerity equals tonight. Jack Chater says, I can't wait for the takeover. We'll finally have a club with some ambition. Graham Knox says, we can't keep on playing backwards all the time. David Bird says, Bruce is not a head coach. He is just a head. George Boyle says, this would be the ideal manager if the takeover goes through and having bacon. I would say Poch brings the best out of players. So many comments coming in, and as always, guys, we're running out of time. Look, we've got some big games coming up. We've got Watford at the weekend, and then our Peters to a close with another couple of the top 6 that we'll have to play at Tottenham and Liverpool. What would you want to see, Malcolm, from these remaining fixtures from Steve Bruce and the players?
Well, I'd like to see from Bruce. I would like to see him fully instructing the players as to the best way to play against the Tottenhams and the Liverpools. I felt that they were almost without instruction tonight, without good advice on how to play. The formation was set, but I didn't see very much beyond that. So yeah, it's a really difficult one because you guys you're sort of mentioning it's the end of the season, and people are they're getting in a beach mood more than anything else, and I really do hate that kind of attitude from footballers, that they're professional footballers and they should be giving everything in each of these games that remain, as they have done in the rest of the season. And if I were Bruce, I would have them in tomorrow morning and I would give them the rollicking of their lives. Not for the fact that they've lost to Man City, but just for the fact that they were so negative and almost disinterested, some of them.
Yeah. Steve, your last comments on that and what you would hope to see from the lads for the rest of the season?
I think that was one line that just came up there, effort. I want to see some effort. I want to see the effort in that squad. I want to see them to prove us wrong in the next 5 games, because we know what they're doing wrong. We know what we watched to us that they are better than that.
Yeah, Mitch.
Yeah, sure. If just suppose somebody came from Australia and was staying with you, and you said, "Oh, come on, let's watch the game." Do you think that they would believe that they were 2 sides in the same division?
No,
Definitely not.
No,
absolutely. That's something that Steve Bruce has got to overcome. He's got to change that totally.
Yeah, Mitch, final word to you, mate.
What do I want to see? Balls like space hoppers. That's what I want to see. I just want to see we go down swinging. If we're going to go down, let's go down swinging against Tottenham, against Liverpool. Let's have a bloody good go. I'd rather see we lose 5-2 and say, yeah, at least we had a go and we put some youngsters on and they gave a monkeys, rather than this 5-0 where we just basically put our pants down and said, lube it up and do us gently, please.
And that's a great way of putting it, Mitch, and I can always rely on you to come out with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a line to finish on, isn't it?
He's nailed it again, lads. He's nailed it again. Listen, absolute pleasure. We've let it run over slightly. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Give this a share. And anyone who didn't see the pre-match show, tune in. It's well worth it, because, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about tonight's game. Me, myself, Malcolm and John Gibson did a lot of talking about the NUFC takeover today. So you can get that on the channel. Just subscribe to the channel and click down on today's earlier broadcast. And I will be back on Friday with the lads, Mitch and Steve, for another 2-hour special. I will join by Malcolm, of course, on Saturday to look ahead to the Watford game. So thanks for joining us tonight, lads. Take care, and I'll see you all soon.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. Cheers. And Yes, what I've got is Liam Kennedy from the Shields Gazette tomorrow. He will be joining me for 6 o'clock for a chat on the season and the takeover and a lot of other things. But we'll also be opening up the question and answer session to you guys on Friday. So when you join myself and Steve and Neil on Friday night, you'll be able to join the show and potentially put your questions. And we're not talking about submitting them on YouTube. You'll be able to come on as well. So we will send you the link if you fancy coming on and having a quick chat with us online for 5 minutes. You'll be able to do that. But thanks for joining us tonight. Join me tomorrow night with Liam Kennedy from the Shields Gazette. Thanks, guys.